Hey, it's Drew Edwards here at Business Coach Marketing, where we help business and executive coaches quickly generate more leads and attract more coaching clients with low-cost, high-return marketing strategies that get you results. And we have on the line today with us Alan Stransman, the author and expert book creation expert, to answer a few questions about positioning yourself as an expert to your potential coaching clients. Alan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Drew. Great to be with you.
Great stuff. Can you tell us a bit more about your background and what you do now?
Well, my background, Drew, is mostly as a television writer, producer, and director. I did start my professional career as an English teacher, and I taught English for a couple of years, and was handed a somewhat unexpectedly a film course to teach, and taught a film course and got kind of very intrigued and by the whole process of filmmaking. So I went back to university, did a master's degree in television and film production, and for the most part, my career was in broadcast television production as a writer, producer, and director. And I'll try to keep this relatively short, but there are a few kind of twists and turns along the way, Drew. But I created a television series on spas, destination and resort spas. We did a number of UK destinations. We were all over the world. We did 78 episodes, and that got me very immersed into the culture of the international spa industry. And coming out of that, and because I was really fortunate enough to meet so many leaders in the spa industry, I had an idea to create an urban facility for men, one of the first day spas in the world for men, and I did that in downtown Toronto. You're probably wondering, well, what has this got to do with our conversation? Well, I wrote a book about that experience, which was called "Don't Let Your Dream Business Turn into a Nightmare: A Cautionary Tale for Would-Be Entrepreneurs." Okay. And it was through, in fact, a very wise friend of mine who became kind of quite religious, hadn't seen me in many, many years, and he said to me, well, you know, when you started your spa, you thought you were becoming an entrepreneur and a small business owner, but God had another plan for you. He had a plan for you to become a writer. And so I wrote this book, Drew, called "Don't Let Your Dream Business Turn into a Nightmare," and it was in 2008, 2009, and the economy had collapsed all around the world, and yeah. I had a publisher who loved the book in Toronto, in Canada here, and they said, we're kind of paralyzed with fear. They subsequently went bankrupt about a year later, and so I self-published the book, and that's how I kind of learned the process. I was a writer from my many years in television, so writing the book, even though it's an unusual book, it's written in the second person. It's narrated in the second person. But anyway, I self-published it. I started learning how to market the book online, and I also targeted universities with that book, and had the book added to the entrepreneurship programs in different universities, and then I wrote a second book, which was also kind of in the memoir vein, and because I had kind of learned the process of self-publishing kind of the hard way by doing it myself, I created two kind of sister services or companies, if you will. One which is called memoirwriter.net, or website memoirwriter.net, and I write memoirs for people. And I have another website, expertbookcreation.com, which takes up most of my time these days, or maybe it's 60-40, but I write expert books for business professionals, including coaches.
Brilliant. Awesome. Great stuff. Alan, again, I'm really excited to have you on the line today. I know you've got a lot to share with us today. Can you just tell us a bit more about what you wanted to share with the audience, for people that don't know?
Well, what I've been really doing, Drew, because as I mentioned, I I went through the process myself of publishing my own books. Now, this is all very, very recent, and I don't mean recent in my own life, but just kind of recent in the kind of life, the cultural life of the publishing industry and so forth. Just to go back a bit, my mother, while I was growing up, was tapping out a book about her childhood, and about 10 years ago, she decided to go through what used to be called a vanity press, and she got 100 copies of the book made. Now, bear in mind, Drew, the book was already written. She wasn't she wasn't hiring a writer. She was just going through the publishing process, and paid $4,000 for 100 books. That was not that long ago. Very prohibitive. She had 100 books. They were $40 a piece. And that process was really, first of all, it was prohibitively expensive, and it was sort of looked upon as a kind of an ego trip for most people. Well, now, fast forward to where we are now, Drew. I mean, I come from the background of an industry which was a gatekeeper industry, the broadcast television industry. You have an idea for a show, you take it to a broadcaster, you're one of, N hundred or 1,000 proposals that they have for that year. The publishing business is just the same. And, if fortune smiles upon you, you may get your book published or you may get your television show produced. And so how many potentially successful books and television shows and films never got made because they didn't have the right connections, or people just, made mistakes in not choosing them. Well, as a self-published or an independently published author, the freedom to do that, the power of it, Drew, is so exhilarating. If you want to publish a book and own a book and express and we'll now focus on this discussion and expert books. I mean, you can publish your own fiction as well, anything you want. But if you want to do specifically what I refer to as an expert book, which is really a marketing tool, you can just go ahead and do it, and you don't have to find a publisher who thinks they're going to make money from your book. You can publish your book and make money from your book without having to get anyone's permission to do that. And that is just a fantastic thing.
Yeah, sure. So just for our listeners, can you explain exactly what an expert book is and how you can use it as a marketing tool?
Well, I define an expert book as a book which confers authority, credibility, and expert status upon its author. Now, the two components of that, at least. One is the fact that it's a book. There's a certain, there's just a certain prestige, there's a certain respect and authority that just accrues to anyone who's written a book. Just because a book is not it's sort of like running a marathon. Like, no one really asks you how fast you ran it. Just, if you ran a marathon, you've done something that most haven't. Yeah. Same with a book. You write a book, people go, well, you wrote a book. Now, it really helps if your book is good. I mean, that really helps. If you have some interesting, thoughts, or you have a signature approach to a problem, or whatever it is you want people to know that makes you different. Maybe it's, a lot of it's just your personality, your way of doing things. When people sit down and engage in your book, they get to know you in a way that they can't just from maybe even a meeting, or certainly not from handing a business card to someone.
Yeah.
So, you can explain a more complicated business if if your business is not, like an elevator speech type business. I mean, some people have an elevator speech business, some people don't. So an expert book is a book that markets you. And it's funny because someone said to me recently, well, what about the cover? And you've got to have a cover that grabs people's attention. And I said, no, you don't. No, you don't. Now, if you can, great. But don't forget, we're not talking about a book that's in a bookstore with 400,000 other titles. Now, you can do that. You can do anything you want with your book. But if you focus on the concept of an expert book, it's a book you give to someone. you hand it to them in person, or you send it as a digital file, so it's not competing for attention with hundreds of thousands of other books. So it doesn't, need to jump off the shelves. Again, nothing wrong with a great cover, and I love the cover of my books, especially my second memoir, which has a very colorful and humorous cover, which is great. But again, it's in the content, it's in the positioning of you as an expert in your field that you really derive the value.
Awesome, great stuff. So, how important do you believe having an expert book is in order to position yourself as an expert to potential coaching clients?
Well, you have to remember, Drew, that, Tony Robbins and T. Harv Eker and Brian Tracy, these guys are coaches. I mean, you may think, what are you talking about? They're not coaches. They're world-famous authors. They're coaches.
Yeah.
They do live events. What are they doing? They also do private coaching, for probably $10,000 a weekend or something like that. I know T. Harv Eker had something in Hawaii and something like that. Obviously, we're talking about the very, very top end of the coaching, of the writing, of the expert world. But I don't think there's anything you can do that can get attention, media attention, like a book. I mean, you're not going to record an album, so, I mean, a book, you just never know. I mean, any book can take off, and so, I mean, to me, a book is just the opportunity now, and to be able to market yourself, to be able to express your views, position yourself. I don't know how you even begin to to compare that to. I mean, I went to see T. Harv Eker, and if your listeners don't know T. Harv Eker, he may be better known here in North America, but he wrote a book, Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, and has an enormous personal development company, Peak Potentials, and I came to know him through his book, and people from all around the world will take his week long or weekend long, or he's got literally dozens of programs. But again, the entry point with a lot of people like that is the book.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how you come to know him. But he began by doing coaching and seminars, and so there's a very interesting interrelationship, Drew, between speakers and authors, and you can become a speaker by writing a book, or you can be in another field and then write a book, and then you can become a speaker. So it's very much a two-way street. Once you have a book, media people can come to you, they can interview you. The next thing you know, you're a speaker. And then in my book, I interviewed speakers who realized very quickly that they couldn't really get booked as speakers unless they had a book. So the two sort of goes hand in glove. So for your coaching listeners who may not have even thought of themselves as speakers, once they have a book, they may go, wait a minute here. Here's a real opportunity. And I mean, speaking can be a very, very lucrative thing to do, as you're well aware.
Awesome. Okay, brilliant. So, can you give me some examples of coaches who have done what you're talking about and written a book that's helped them to position themselves as experts?
Well, I talk to people all the time, and there's I mean, I have books here on my desk. I was just here's a gent named Hugh Little, whose company is Red Cap Sales Coaching. He teaches people how to. He's a sales expert, and he has a book called Selling for Fun and Profit, subtitled "Take the Icky and Scary Out of Sales." Larry Williams, who's a customer service expert, I have his book here, Customer Service A to Z, or A to Z for the Americans. Rob Cuesta, who's a UK-based coach, has written several books, including Secrets of a Six-Figure Expert. And then, those are coaches, and there are many more, but those are some coaches who are not necessarily the mega stars of on the level of a Tony Robbins or a Brendan Burchard, who's one of the best known guys in the expert world. He coaches people on how to become experts, and he is, a living example of his own philosophy as expert and as a coach. So, and I'll even include myself, if I may, not because of my status, if you will, Drew, but because I wrote my book, and there's actually two versions of my book. It began as a book for speakers because I had spoken to some speakers and found out very quickly that a speaker without a book is basically disadvantaging him or herself, and so. But then I versioned the book. So that book was called "Why Every Speaker Should Have an Expert Book," which is a total no-brainer. I mean, if you're a speaker, you simply have to have a book. First, to get booked, and second, you've got a captive audience. And the speakers that I interviewed for my book, all told me that they'll sell 30% or more to their audience. And if you've got 100 people or more, 300 people, and 100 of them buy your book for $20 each, that's a nice little added fee, for your revenue to add to your speaker's fee. So Why Every Speaker Should Have an Expert Book was a no-brainer. And then Why Every Speaker, Coach, Consultant, Trainer, and Entrepreneur Should Have an Expert Book was a version of the book, because once again, anybody in any business can benefit from a book. I mean, honestly, I'll go into a clothing store and talk to some of my friends who own stores like that. I'll say, well, why would you not have a book on how to dress? How to build a wardrobe for under $5,000. For someone that's just coming out of college and has their first job. If you walked into a clothing store and somebody said, "Here, why don't you take my book, How to Build a Wardrobe for under $5,000, or How to Dress for Your First Job," would there not be some number of people that you would hand that book to that would say, "Oh, all right, I just got a nice job. Yeah, I'll spend the $5,000." I mean, somebody's going to do that, and somebody's going to opt into your coaching or sign up for your coaching program when they read your book and they go, "Yeah, that all sounds good," because otherwise everybody's just kind of like everybody else, and there's a lot of competition in any field. So, getting back to myself just very briefly, if I may. I mean, I'm talking to you, Drew. Very, very pleased to have the opportunity to do so. But I'm talking to you because I sent you my book.
Yeah.
I mean, how else would I get on the phone with you or get to know you or get to introduce myself to you? So my book, is allowing me to talk to you and your listeners. So, it's again a living proof of the value of an expert book.
Sure. And just on your book, so I read your book, Why Every Speaker, Coach, Consultant, and Trainer and Entrepreneur Should Have an Expert Book, which is for anyone listening who's thinking about using that book to help position themselves as an expert. It's definitely worth a read, and we'll tell you a bit more how to get that later on. But Alan, in that book, one of the things that sort of became clear to me was that my understanding is that there are a few type of expert book to choose from. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there in the book, Drew, I lay out a couple of kind of traditional ideas, which many people who are in a professional field can probably use for their own particular kind of expertise, and it's all based on a kind of problem-solving approach, if you will. So, whether it's how to invest for the future, or how to protect yourself, your assets in the future. It can be an investment book. It can be a health-related book. It can be a weight loss-related book. It can be an anger management book. There's usually a step-by-step process. And so one of the most familiar formats for a book is a kind of step-by-step process whereby you, as the author, lay out the problem. Many people don't know how to do this. I myself went through this. I'm now outlining the approach to the book. So in the first chapter, traditionally, you want to establish your credibility in a kind of I've been there, I know your pain type of thing. And in chapter 2, this is what I did, and I'm working with a gal right now who is writing a book about fear and dealing with fear and so forth. So, and based on her personal experience and what she went through and how she learned how to overcome it, it can be losing weight, it can be many things of that nature. So, and then outlining the process sort of step by step by step. So that's a familiar process and a familiar format. But there's a lot of other things that I see people sending me books and that have all kinds of more original and different types of formats. Like there's a list. I mean, you can I'll just mention a few, and I think anything goes in that world. You can do a sort of step-by-step format. You can do a frequently asked questions. I mean, I think that's a very good format for a book. What are the 25 questions that that an oncologist would be asked or should be asked by anyone that's facing a cancer diagnosis? That FAQ, most frequently asked questions, or questions that should be asked. What are the 25 or the 50 most common mistakes that people make when they do things? A how-to book. For someone that wants to do an expert book that's a little bit, and if they're kind of well-known, or if they want to do something a little bit different and something that can be very easily executed, you could do an interview book whereby someone just interviews you and you put that book out, or you interview someone else. That's a book. Nothing wrong with that. Or you can collect some of your blog posts and articles and combine them into a book. So there are just many, many different approaches. I think kind of anything goes in this day and age, Drew, because the whole point is, I think, to be engaging, to sound authoritative. To make an impression where people go, hey, I like this person. I'd like to know more about this person. And, so I try to be as flexible and as imaginative, or encourage people to be, rather than to, feel that there's a format that they have to follow. So, everybody's expertise is different, and it may just fall into one of a number of different formats that I outline in my book.
Okay, awesome, great stuff. So, when you talk to coaches, consultants, or entrepreneurs about creating this expert book, what are some of the objections that you get, and how do you overcome those objections? Because I know a lot of our listeners will be really having the same sort of concerns right now as they're listening in.
Well, first of all, people want to know how do you do it. That's the most common question. Well, how would you write a book for me? They wonder. And the great thing is, for me, that the technology that we have now, which I used to dream about, like in the old days, 10 years ago, whatever, when I used to do a lot of freelance writing in the television world, the video world, and you'd think, wow, wouldn't it be great if you could work with people from all over the world? Well, you can. So interviewing people over the phone, transcribing and recording and transcribing the interview, that allows you to really capture the speech pattern. It's not like madly writing down notes, in the old technology or whatever.
Yeah.
The fact that you've actually got someone's speech pattern, like I'm doing a memoir with a woman who lives in Atlanta, and she has a very distinctive idiom because she was brought up in the South. She's African American. She's got a very colorful kind of language, and her book sounds like her. It doesn't sound like me. It sounds like her. So question number one I get from people is, how do you make it sound like me? And then, people are, always kind of curious to know, well, is it, how long is it going to take? Because there's still a stigma around around book writing that it's years and years. I mean, I think a book should be doable within 60 days, easily doable within 60 days. So for anyone listening, and there are many, many people out there that think writing a book is very, very daunting. When I did a master's thesis, just if I may, I did a master's thesis in 10 weeks start to finish. And I would have never been able to do that except for a professor of mine who once said to me, the most overrated, overblown thing in the world is this idea that a thesis, now this was at the master's level, not the PhD, that it's 5 years. And if you think it's 5 years, then you'll spend 5 years. If somebody says to you it's 1 year, then you go 1 year? It's like a book, 60 days. If somebody calls me and says, let's start a book, I'll say, this is not going to be 9 months or 18 months or 3 years. 60 days from now, like my book, the one that you mentioned, Drew, that you read, yeah. I wrote that book and I literally had that book. Now, I did the interviews over a period of a couple of weeks because of the availability of my subjects. But writing the book and having it available on Amazon and on Kindle and to be able to send out, I'm talking about like a week to 10 days. It's just that quick.
Awesome. Great stuff. So, I mean, talk to me a bit more about, I mean, you mentioned that you had your book self-published. And I know that there's two routes you can go down. You can get it self-published or you can go the traditional route. Can you tell us a bit more about those and sort of pros and cons of each route?
Well, I can't say very much about the traditional route simply because I was told very plainly from the beginning of the process with my first book, Don't Let Your Dream Business Turn Into a Nightmare, that was not going to be a route for me. I called a literary agent that I had done some work with or had some dealings with in the television world, and I knew my book was funny because I had sat with several people and just handed them the book and they laughed, and I would say, well, what's so funny? And they'd say this. So, I mean, I knew people were amused by the book and entertained by the book, but I was very, very soon quickly disabused of the notion that the quality of the book had any bearing on whether or not a traditional publisher would have interest in it. I was told, no one knows who you are and you don't have a platform. And then the publisher that loved my book said the exact same thing. I mean, I was told by a publisher, literally the managing editor of a major publisher in Canada, that my book was the most original business book he'd ever read. But he said, "Who are you? Do you have any kind of platform?" And I said, "No." Well, then when I read Michael Levin's material, some of the material, Michael Levin, very well-known ghostwriter, and some of his writings on his website, and others, and other conversations, it became just sort of standard, knowledge within the publishing industry that publishers want to work with people that have a platform. And that's why you see all these radio show hosts and television hosts and people that have a television show or they're a judge on a talent. They all have books because they can promote the books. But if you're somebody that does not have a platform, for me to go through that process and to find an agent and a 3 year process, I wasn't going to do that. So that is just not something that I would have the patience for to send out. And in my book, I actually recount the story of a Canadian author named Terry Fallis, Fallis, who wrote a book called The Best Laid Plans. And I spoke to Terry before I self-published my first book. Here's a guy that wrote a book, and this I tell this story in my book because it's so amazing. He wrote this book, Drew, sent it around for literally 2 years to publishers and did not get so much as a letter of rejection. When he decided to self-publish the book, and then as a joke, he submitted it to the Stephen Leacock Humor Award competition, one of the most prestigious literary awards in Canada, and he wins. He
Wow.
won the award. He literally won one of the most prestigious not just humor, but literary awards in Canada with a book that wasn't even rejected. It was completely ignored by
Yeah.
publishers for 2 years. And then what do you think happened? Well, they came knocking on his door and published the book. So, I mean, if you're a celebrity or you can get a publisher to get behind your book and tell you that they're going to, give it wide distribution and they're going to really put muscle behind it, and and your name isn't Bill Clinton or something like that, and you can get that, great. But if you're like me and like most people, the fact that you can publish your book yourself and market your book yourself. Here's something very interesting, Drew. There's another name you may or may not know, or your listeners may or may not know, an internet marketing guru by the name of Alex Mondosian. And he was one of the first people that I kind of got, involved with in terms of his trainings as an internet marketing guy when I had just written my book and wanted to learn what was going on. And one of the things that Alex says that I find so interesting, he says that he does not outsource marketing. He doesn't outsource his marketing. And, he might outsource all kinds of other things in his business, but not his marketing. And you think about it, what is the traditional publishing if not outsourcing the marketing of your book? That's exactly what it is like. It's like, here, you can have my book, you can change the title, you can,
Yeah.
So it's not for me. It's not for me. I love, in fact, my first book, Don't Let Your Dream Business, I put out a second edition because a wonderful, wonderful man named Skip Williams, one of the top spa consultants in the world, loved my book, and I asked him to write a foreword to a second edition, and he did. And because I control the rights to my book, I put out a second edition with a foreword from Skip Williams, and it's great. You'd never get to do that if you were working with a publisher, and the general rule was 3 months. Well, no, it was 6 months. I beg your pardon. The general rule was 6 months. That you put a book out, that the bookstores would give it 6 months to catch on. And I recently read an article about the biggest bookstore chain here in Canada. I won't mention it by name, but there's only one, and they now say 90 days. Your book goes into a bookstore, it has 90 days. 90 days to catch on, to start selling, to make its, its reputation. Otherwise, it's off the shelves. So who wants that kind of pressure for the book? I look at my books as lifelong projects, like children. You're going to raise them for 20 years. And, 5 years from now, my second book, which is called So Why Have You Never Been Married? A Memoir of Love, Loss, and Lunacy. I mean, that book could get, who knows? Maybe that book could catch fire in some way. Maybe it'll be next year. I don't know. It's just, if you have it, you have a website, you've got an account with a Lightning source or an Amazon. Nobody's going to come along and tell you that your book has been remaindered or it's out of print. And if you really value your writing and you value your expertise, you really don't want someone telling you when you're out of print.
Awesome. Okay, so what 3 things does a coach need to do in order to get started with writing their first expert book?
Well, I think the first thing that, I mean, to quote your great countryman Shakespeare, the readiness is all. That's what I tell people. The readiness is all. You just have to say, I want a book. That's the very first. Once you say, I'm going to have a book, and you get it, you understand the value, then it just becomes a process of how am I going to get it done. If you don't have the time, or you're not a writer, if you find writing very painful, some people are great speakers, they're great on stage, or they're great coaches, they're great in conversation, whatever it is. But the idea, and people tell me this all the time, like, to shape the content for like a 150-page book or longer is just a different skill set that is it's like not everyone can do it. So if you can't do it, don't do it. Mondosian, who I mentioned earlier, another one of his favorite sort of sayings, and I like it a lot too, it comes from a book called Go Strengthen Your Strengths. which which your listeners may or may not know. I believe the book is called "Go Strengthen Your Strengths." I hope I'm not misquoting that or misstating that. But the basic idea, and it's very interesting because it's sort of counterintuitive, is strengthen your strengths, don't strengthen your weaknesses. So a lot of people, in life and in business, spend a lot of their time strengthening their weaknesses. In other words, they try to do things they're not good at, and if they're in a business and there's something they're not good at, like they're really not good at accounting or they're really not good at sales, they work harder and work harder and work harder on it to get better at it. And the basic philosophy of this book is don't do that. Strengthen your strengths. Don't strengthen your weaknesses. So if you're not a writer, don't try to strengthen your weakness. Just hire someone who is a writer and get your book done. So number one is, commit to the book. Number two is get it done. And number three is use it. Use it. Use it in the way I used mine and the way other people use their, really, really exploit that book. And those are the three things I think you have to do.
Awesome. Great stuff. And thanks ever so much for sharing. Is there anything else you'd like to add to what you said so far?
Well, you did mention earlier in the conversation, Drew, my book. Now, my book is a free download at www.expertbookcreation.com. So now, I did have the two versions available. It was a little bit too confusing, so let me just explain how this works. As I say, there's a kind of a two-way street, but the version that is available is the one that includes coaches, it includes trainers, it includes speakers, entrepreneurs, consultants. But what's interesting is that some of your listeners, may be thinking, I would love to have a book, because you have a book, you meet a prospective client, and you just hand them your book. They take the book home. You can put a QR code on the back of your book cover, and which they can scan if they're reading their book at a coffee shop and they've got their cell phone. They can scan the book and scan the QR code. It can take them to their it can take them to your website where there can be an opt-in. Then you can sell books you can do whatever you like. You can become a speaker and then use your book and sell it, and then have a QR code on the back of your book. And that way, people might hand you, cash for your book, and you wouldn't have any idea of who they were and no way to reach them. But if you give them a book with a QR code and they go to your website and they opt in to a special offer you have on your website, then you can stay in touch with that person, for forever. So that's just one of the ideas that's in my book. And my book, well, I shouldn't say it. It is for sale, and I will just mention this to your listeners, Drew. My book, Why Every Speaker, Coach, Consultant, Trainer, and Entrepreneur Should Have an Expert Book, is available for sale, just because I want to establish it as having a real-world value. Now, I'm prepared to trade that real-world value for an opt-in, and so I have it on my website, theexpertbookcreation.com. But I want people to know that they are getting something that also has a real-world value. So your book, when you send your book to people and or hand it to them, they really should feel that it's not just something that you picked up as a kind of a PLR, piece of private label rights, but it's your book, it's your thoughts, it's your ideas, and if you weren't handing it to them as a free gift, you'd be selling it to them. In other words, it has a value, and when you give someone something of value, you've already created a relationship with them, and there's a certain sense of, I won't say it's indebtedness, but there's just it's just maybe a step short of that, but there's just a sense this person gave me something. I can't tell you the number of people, Drew, honestly, that I've sent an email to and said, would you like a copy of my book? And they've come back and said, thank you for your very generous offer. It's wonderful. They see generosity in that. Has anyone ever thanked you for a business card? Yeah, business card, they go, well, what am I going to do with that? Stick it in my
Yeah.
pocket, and then when I take my shirt to the cleaners, it goes in the garbage. But when you say, would you like my book? They go, thank you for your very generous offer. They know they're getting something of value.
Awesome. Great stuff. Alan, thanks ever so much for sharing that with us. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you. I'm sure our listeners have as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I've had a great time with you, Drew, and I thank you so much. And I'm very, very pleased. I wanted to say about you that I know you're a real leader in the coaching community, and I was, very, very delighted when you invited me to connect and to do this interview. So I thank you so much, Drew.
awesome. Great stuff. It's absolutely fine. Can you just give us that website one more time, just for anyone that didn't quite get it?
www.expertbookcreation.com. Just the three English words together, expertbookcreation.com.
Expertbookcreation.com. Alan, thanks ever so much. I'll speak with you again soon. Until then, take care, take action, and be relentless.